Cassie here, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to talk to you about being a puzzler. So in a previous video, I believe it was my AuthorTube newbie tag video, there was a question that asked if you are a plotter, pantser, or plantser, and I said that I am a puzzler. And a couple people were curious to hear more about that, so here you go. So I'm going to talk about what it means to be a puzzler. Now, a puzzler is a term that I heard on a video interview sort of podcast thing on YouTube. I don't remember the name of the person or which video it was or anything, so I will find it later and I'll link it in the description below. So if you want to hear what they said about being a puzzler, I don't want to pretend that I came up with this idea or something. They mentioned it and I think they heard it from someone else, so I didn't invent this, but it seemed to really fit how I write. So you can watch that video to see what she says about being a puzzler, but for this video I'm just gonna basically tell you what my writing process was for writing my first book as it relates to outlining, or a lack of outlining, if you will. So basically I would say that there were 5 stages for me writing my first novel from start to finish as a first draft. I'm not going to be talking in this video about beta reading and editing and critique partners and all that, but just the process of getting that very first draft unpolished done. So stage number 1 would be the daydreaming stage. I am a huge daydreamer all the time anyway, so this is not really an abnormal thing for me to just be daydreaming throughout the day. I also work as a housekeeper professionally, so that's kind of a more physically stimulating job, but not very mentally stimulating, which is great for being a writer because it leaves a lot of mental energy open to daydream and think about my books and whatever I'm currently working on while I'm working. So for my first book, stage 1 basically looked like this. I was watching a show called The Following, and there was a particular character on that show that really stuck with me, and I wanted to hear more of his story, but he wasn't a very central character. The story wasn't really about him. So that kind of led me to thinking about what it was that interested me about that character and what I wanted to see more of. And you know, I'm a big fan of redemption stories, so that's kind of what I wanted to see from this character because he was one of the villains of the story. But obviously, if you've seen The Following, that's just not what it's about. It's not really about redeeming the bad guys. The bad guys are just bad, and that's it. But basically, my brainstorming stage or daydreaming stage began with an idea for a character, and that character is Jacob Perry. Initially, if I remember correctly, it has been a while since the beginning stages of writing this book. It's been a few years. But if I remember correctly, initially what I knew about my character Jacob was that I wanted to write about someone who is, by society's standards, the bad guy of the story. Not just the cute bad boy in the leather jacket who's kind of snarky, but someone who's actually really bad. He's killed people. He is a bad guy. And what I wanted to explore in my story is what would happen if someone like that decided that they wanted to change. Basically, the 2 points in my story that I knew right off the bat when I got this idea for this character, I knew that I wanted to explore, first off, what led that person to that point of becoming such a bad person, and secondly, what led them to realize that they needed to change. And then after that, I wanted to move into exploring how they would change and how society would accept their changes, and basically what happens to a convict post-incarceration once they're reintegrated into society, and what kind of struggles do they go through to become a productive member of the community again. Given their past, given what people might be judging them for, given the fact that they've just maybe spent a lot of years in prison where they're not really developing skills or meeting people or networking or getting job opportunities, you know, they're kind of starting their life over again, very behind schedule from everyone else their age, depending on how long they've been incarcerated. So initially, that was kind of my first spark of an idea, and that's what I knew I wanted to talk about. So in the daydreaming stages, basically what I do is daydream a lot. I daydreamed and brainstormed a lot while I was working. I took a ton of long drives later in the evenings after work just to get in my head and have no distractions and just think about this story. I also talk to myself out loud a lot, which is a good tip for writing believable dialogue, and I have a video on that I either just posted or will be posting soon. I can't remember which. But anyway, basically the brainstorming slash daydreaming stage is exactly what it sounds like. It's brainstorming and daydreaming. That is the first stage of, I think, anyone's novel writing experience, really. But for me, that was like a pretty long, significant stage. Which brings us to stage number 2, which would be writing whatever is fresh in my mind. So this is the point in which I would say I am definitely a pantser in the beginning, meaning that I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. I'm not outlining or writing anything down. Well, I mean, I'm writing a lot of things, but I'm not writing like ideas down in an outline kind of form. Basically, I go to work and I daydream all day about my story. I come up with a scene that is interesting to me, and I start thinking about what kind of dialogue would be exchanged between the characters, and then I come home and I write that. This works really well for me because, first of all, I don't have a super good memory. So a lot of times if I have an idea for a scene, I tend to think like, oh, well, I'll remember that later, and then I often forget. And it's really frustrating later on when I'm like, oh, I know that there was a really good scene to put here, but I don't remember what it was, or I don't remember the exact wording that I had come up with for this dialogue. So that can be very frustrating. So in the beginning stages, I like to just write whatever is freshest in my mind, whatever I am super excited about. If I come up with a cool scene or a good bit of dialogue, I write it down immediately that night. So as I mentioned in my first novel, I wanted to talk about sort of the beginning stages of Jacob's journey. I wanted to discuss his past, how he got to this point of being a murderer, bad guy, and then I also wanted to begin his journey of transformation. I wanted this story for my first book to be kind of the point in which he decides that he needs to make a change and begins that part of his life. And so because I wanted this to be a romance, also because I love romance, I decided to have a female character be sort of the one who helps him through that process. So to accomplish that, I came up with the idea of a criminal psychologist working for the police department to try to track down this killer. She ends up getting sort of kidnapped by him, which kind of puts them in a setting in which they are alone together for a long period of time. She's kind of trapped there, but not like 100% against her will. You'll understand that more if you read the story. But basically at that point, she decides to just make the most of the situation she's in, and she figures, you know, if I'm here, I can see that he's conflicted, and it's best for my safety if this guy is in a good, positive frame of mind. So since he's kind of already wrestling with his inner demons, maybe I should help him out. And she sort of helps push him towards the first steps of his new journey of becoming a better person. So just for some context, that is kind of what my first book is about. I remember one of the first scenes that really came to mind for me was a scene in which Jacob and Sarah are laying in bed together, which sounds kind of weird, but it's not like in a sexual way or romantic way or anything. But they're laying in bed together and he sort of starts to open up to her emotionally a lot more than he has been. And it's kind of the tipping point in which he finally lets his guard down a little bit and opens up emotionally, and she can really see that he doesn't want to live this life anymore, but he just doesn't know how to change because this is all he knows, and he's kind of at a place now where he feels like this is who I am now, and I don't know how I would even begin to do anything different. So this is the scene in which she kind of realizes her purpose for being here with him and sort of makes the decision within herself to help him. And yeah, it's a really like emotional scene, and it's a very important moment in the story, and that was one of the first scenes that came to mind when I was writing this book, and I wrote it immediately right when I thought of it, even though it is smack dab in the middle of the book. That's one thing about being a puzzler, is that I don't write things in order at all at the beginning in this second stage of writing what's fresh in my mind. A lot of times I actually end up writing the very end of the story pretty early on, because as I'm daydreaming about all these epic big moments, the very end is usually going to be a pretty epic big moment, so it's going to come to mind pretty quickly and I write it right then. So whatever I've been daydreaming about that day, I go home and write it. It might be a really important scene like the one I just described, or it could even just be a paragraph or two of some little funny conversation that the two characters are having together that builds the reader's interest in their potential romance. Whatever it is, if it's fresh in my mind and I just thought of it, that's what I'm writing. Basically, I continue through stage 2 until I run out of ideas, until I feel like I have gotten all of my brainstorming and daydreaming, all of these things that are just coming to mind so quick that I can barely keep up with them enough to write them all down. As soon as I'm done with all of that and all of that is written, I stop. I stop there and I reassess, and that is when I move into stage 3, which is outlining. Stage 2 is very fast-paced, it's very involved, I'm very focused when I'm in stage 2. This is the stage that is probably the most fun to me, and it's the one where I am just writing every day, all the time. Anytime I have the time, I will be writing because everything's fresh in my mind and I'm so excited to get it all down before I forget, and while I'm still like in this frame of mind where I'm really excited about the scene I just came up with. And once all of that is gone and my brain has settled down and I'm kind of out of ideas, that's when I sit down and start to outline. So how to do an outline is kind of a whole topic all on its own, so I don't think I'm gonna discuss that super in depth here, but basically stage 3 is when I sit down and make an outline. So I think about the plot from beginning to end, I think about the scenes that I already have written, I write all those down on sticky notes, and I put them sort of in an estimated order of when I think these things might happen within the story. Sometimes they end up getting switched, but usually I can kind of tell like what the character's relationship is like at this point. Like if they're really close by the time they have this conversation, then this conversation is probably going to happen towards the end of the story. So I write all that down on sticky notes, I put them down on a whiteboard or whatever, and then I fill in the gaps. That's when I really sit down and start to become a hardcore plotter. So to keep a long story short, I make an outline. That's pretty much stage 3, making the outline. And stage 4 would be when I start to write with my outline. So instead of just writing whatever's fresh in my mind, I go back to the very beginning of the outline and I start in chapter 1 and I write that. And then in this stage is also when I would be pulling some of the scenes that I've already written and plugging them into the spots where they belong, which is kind of where the puzzler word comes into play. I really like the term puzzler because to me it kind of makes me think of something that's non-linear. And that's kind of how I write. I write all over the place, different scenes, some in the very beginning, very end, middle, whatever, and then I plug them all in as I start to write down through my outline. Stage 4 is the stage that I am in right now, currently for my sequel. I've written all the things that are fresh in my mind from stage 2, I've made my outline in stage 3, and now I'm in stage 4 where I have started at the beginning. I'm in chapter 6 now, so I've written chapters 1 through 5, and some of those chapters I've taken bits that I already and some of those chapters I've taken bits that I've already written from stage 2 and plugged them in to, you know, chapter 1. I think I had a lot of little bits from chapter 1. I had a really cute scene in chapter 2 that I was excited about, but I didn't have anything in between. So now in stage 4, I have started at the beginning and gone through a lot more linearly. I'm doing it in order. So that's stage 4, right? 4, did I say 4? Start at the beginning of my outline, keep writing in order while taking the scenes from stage 2 and plugging them in wherever they fit. And then when I get to the end of the story, I'm done. I think at the beginning of this video I said I had 5 stages. I guess stage 5 would just be like the polishing stage, which I wasn't really going to talk about in this video because that's a whole other thing. Basically, that is how I wrote my first book. It's also how I wrote my second book so far. I haven't finished writing my second book, and it's also kind of how I'm writing another book on the side too. That one started as a fan fiction where I was just kind of writing cute little scenes of these 2 characters that I liked, which kind of would be the stage 2 where I'm daydreaming and just writing whatever's fresh in my mind. And I kind of ran out of ideas for that, and then I decided that I wanted to make it into an original story. So now I'm on stage 3 of that book, which would be the outlining stage. I've written everything that's fresh in my mind, and now I am going back and plotting it all out so that I have a whole story here that can be an entire novel and not just little scenes here and there that are interesting. So that for me is what it means to be a puzzler. I hope I explained that well. And I'm curious to see if anybody can relate, if any of you write this way. It really works well for me, but I know for some people all of that just sounds crazy, because for the hardcore plotters, my stages 1 and 2 probably sound like they're all over the place and totally unorganized. And then for the hardcore pantsers, stages 3 and 4 probably sound way too structured. So I'm kind of in the middle between all of those, but I don't really like the term plantser. I think puzzler is a better word. So I hope I've explained correctly why I think that. So that was my writing process. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something. If you did, let me know in the comments below, because it's nice to hear when I'm doing something right. And if you like this video, hit the thumbs up, and if you want to see more from me in the future, subscribe below. My first book, which I've talked a whole lot about in this video, so you have a good sense of what the story is. It's called Keep No Record, and it's available for purchase on Amazon. And that's it. I'll see y'all next time. Have a great day. Bye.